So Google Analytics 4. Before we start, who are we? Who are these faces that you are starting to see? My name is Abby Matchett. I'm an associate director here at Bounteous, and I have spent several years working for some of our largest enterprise clients, driving their analytics strategy, creating complex implementations, and really activating on that data. I come from a really complex financial background. I worked in investment banking for several years and sort of transitioned into data science when I received my master's in data science from Carnegie Mellon University here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So I love solving complex business challenges, but also providing a lot of context to them. We know that it's important to solve what the business needs at this time, and that's why I'm really excited to talk about Google Analytics 4 with you here today. GA4 is going to be a change in the way that we sort of collect and think about our digital data. And it's going to be something that the entire analytics community is really talking about and buzzing about in the next year. So I'm here today with my colleague, Sean Power, who's going to be leading our Q&A session. And I'm so excited to be here with Sean today because he and I actually developed the very first Google Analytics public training together. And so this is a passionate part of the analytics world that Sean and I are really invested in, and I can't wait to answer some of your questions with him today.
Yeah, thanks, Abby. The first Google Analytics 4 public training was done by Bounteous, along with a ton of resources that we're going to talk about as well. So as Abby mentioned, I'm Sean Power. I'm a lead analytics consultant here at Bounteous. And I've been working in digital analytics, and I have a marketing background in digital marketing for about the past decade now. Before Google Analytics 4, very heavily involved in training for Universal Analytics, both with the Bounteous training program, as well as if you're in Toronto, Canada, where I am, you may have come to a training or two that I've been involved in. And so really excited to bring all of that to today's conversation and talk about what's being described as the future of Google Analytics in Google Analytics 4.
Excellent. So basically, you're in good hands. The two of us have really been focusing on early testing and early adoption for Google Analytics 4. We've implemented the product and the solution on several of our large and smaller clients. So we have a lot of great insights to share with you today about GA4. So quickly, our agenda, we're obviously going to answer that question, what is GA4? And hopefully we'll be covering today a lot of slides that give you updates on where GA4 is, and then also where we think things are going to progress. We're going to share some learnings about migrations, some best practices, and then we're really looking forward to spending most of our time here today on your questions. So please start using that Q&A button in the Zoom features. I see several of you have used it already. Thank you so much. And we are excited to get going. So Sean and I both work for Bounteous, and Bounteous helps deliver really innovative brand experiences to organizations through co-innovation. So we do that in several ways. We do that in identifying digital strategy opportunities for our clients, by designing and building new products and e-commerce experiences, websites, mobile applications, also measuring and optimizing those applications. That's really where we're sitting here today to talk about GA4, and then promoting and engaging. How do we activate and encourage audiences to continue to interact with our tools and our features and our websites and our mobile applications? So Bounteous does this for a lot of our clients across the globe, but we do have offices in all of North America, as you can see here. And these images keep growing as Bounteous continues to grow. And we also have several offices overseas as well as we continue to expand. So just a little bit about Bounteous. I see some shout outs from Ontario and different locations. So I'm glad that we have several of you joining us from all over. And I hope that it's not super early wherever you are in the part of the world. Why are we uniquely qualified to talk to you today about GA4? One of the reasons is because of our experience, but naturally because Bounteous is a top Google marketing platform partner. And so we really help our clients succeed across the GMP stack. Our analytics and insights team has been an industry leader in all things Google Analytics for over 10 years, and we are pioneers in the GA4 space. We're putting out a lot of content, a lot of resources, and a lot of research into why GA4 is going to be the next big thing in analytics. And so with that, let's talk more about what GA4 is.
Great. So if you're joining us today, you've probably already heard about Google Analytics 4 properties. And a lot of, one of the first questions that we get asked is what is it? Is it a new version of Google Analytics? Is it a new type of product? Is it an upgrade? And the answer is that Google Analytics 4 is a new property type. So the same way that we have our universal analytics property, which is, the property ID is prefixed by UA-123456. Google Analytics 4 is a new property type, but it uses an entirely new data model. And with that comes new reporting capabilities. So from a data collection standpoint, one of the primary benefits is that we can send data from both our mobile apps and our websites to the same GA property in a Google Analytics 4 property. Previously, if we were operating mobile apps and websites, the data would go to separate places. Now we can bring them all to the same data collection property. And the second piece is that even if we are not using mobile apps, because of the new data model, which we'll talk a little bit about today, we can really surface new types of insights and new types of reports, especially user level reports like cohort analysis, pathing analysis, and a few others. So while it is in essence a different property type, it is also a completely new approach to how we might think about tracking our digital properties. And so during the registration, we did ask, are you currently using Google Analytics 4 properties? And you can see here, about 1/3 of us are. So about 1/3 of you are. So we want to dive a little bit deeper into that. We've got a couple of other questions. So maybe we'll put the first one on the screen here. So for those of you who are currently using a GA4 property, let us know, is it configured and are you already using it in reports? Maybe you've configured it, but you're not quite reporting with it yet. And maybe you've created a GA4 property, but you haven't configured it yet. And then if you're not currently using GA4, feel free to indicate that as well. Okay, yeah, so here we go. We've got just under 10%, so 7% are currently using it. That's great to see. A few of us have configured it, but we're not using it for reporting yet. Maybe we're doing parallel tracking with 38%. 16% of us have created it, but haven't started configuring it yet. Yeah, so these results are typically what we would see in our GA4 training as well. So if you're curious, you've come to the right place to get your questions answered. And I think we have a second poll here. We just want to dive in a little bit more. Here we go. Do you have an iOS or Android app? So again, this we'll really try to tailor the Q&A based on the group that's here with us. And so a good starting point is to ask whether you've got mobile apps that will be part of this property. All right. So yeah, about 29% of us will be using apps as part of the property, and 70% will only be using this for websites. Great. So we'll talk about the benefits in both instances as well. Now, with respect to those benefits, we're really looking at a number of reasons why Google Analytics 4 properties are so exciting. One of the main reasons here is faster processing. So this happens at least once where my Google Home thinks that I'm talking to Google. So I apologize for that. I'll just have to say Google less, which will be hard. So with respect to faster processing, because the data model is simpler, we are able to generate those reports more quickly. The fact, again, that we're using, really what we're doing is we're using the data model from Google Analytics for Firebase, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And that's the streamlining of that data model. And by using the same data model across both apps and websites, that really unlocks cross-platform capabilities, both from a data collection and a reporting standpoint. So we can do improved types of analysis. In fact, there's an entirely new analysis hub, which allows us to generate custom reports on the fly in new and improved ways. And packaging all of this together, we've got advanced machine learning capabilities built directly into the platform. So for example, we have anomaly detection that is based on Google's algorithms rather than being based on a set of rules that we define for custom alerts. We've got churn probability, revenue probability, we've got likelihood to convert. All of these probability-based reports are built in through Google's machine learning algorithms right into the platform. And here's where we'd really like to zoom in is, again, comparing the Universal Analytics data model to the new GA4 data model. So on the left-hand side, you can see that everything is broken into users, sessions, and hits. And with hits, we have a couple of different types of hits. You're probably most familiar with your page views and your events. There's also user timing hits and a few other types. But from a reporting standpoint, typically what we're thinking about are page views and events. So we've got this data model with 3 levels of users, sessions, and hits. With Google Analytics 4 properties, and again, we're adopting the Google Analytics 4 Firebase data model, everything is broken down into users and events. So sessions are no longer part of the data model. However, we can still count sessions because at the beginning of every session, we get a session start event. So we still have it as a metric, it's just no longer part of the data model. What this allows for is a number of user level analyses that were a little bit difficult to get to, which we'll talk a little bit more as well as we go on. So you might be thinking, okay, so if page views and events are no longer hit types, what does that mean? Well, with everything being an event, we really do mean everything. So there are a number of automatically collected events that we generate, things like session start, which I mentioned previously, page view if you're on a website, or screen view if you're using an app, as well as a number of recommended events. Some of these can be configured right in the interface through a feature called enhanced measurement. So events like whether there's a file download or a scroll, these types of events can be toggled on with the flip of a switch. So for a lot of the smaller users of Google Analytics, or shouldn't say the smaller users, the smaller websites with lower traffic and maybe less experience configuring some of these events manually, we now have an enhanced way to do it directly in the interface. And then we can also send custom events. So we get a lot more flexibility with this new data model. And so with that flexibility comes a new event schema. So the really the broadening of the event structure is what facilitates that flexibility. On the right-hand side is probably the event schema that you're used to. So everything would have an event category, action, and label with maybe a value, which would be a numeric value that we're talking about. And then if you've done any degree of customization with those events, you might be sending some custom dimensions or custom metrics to complement the standard dimensions and standard metrics that we would be getting. In Google Analytics 4, we can send up to 25 parameters with each event. So each event gets a name and then a series of parameters. And these parameters that we would send with each event can really become custom dimensions and metrics in the interface. By way of example, if you want to think about this, chances are, if you are collecting events, maybe you have an event for your page scroll. So anytime somebody scrolls up and down a page, this is a very common event that we see in Universal Analytics. And typically, we see something like the event category is page scroll. So we're grouping all of these together at the category level. The event action might be the specific action that was taken. Did they scroll 25%, 50%, 75%, etc. The event label is often some additional information that might provide more context to that event. So in this case, we're suggesting a page title, GA4 is on fleek. And then we might also have some custom information like the author of that page or the section, if maybe this is, for example, in a blog, or in this case, a news section. In GA4, what we're really looking at is breaking that out. We're moving away from the nomenclature of category, action, and label, and we're making everything an event parameter. So the parameter becomes page title, not event label, for example, and everything gets flattened out, and that's reflected on the left-hand side. So all of these events get generated by users using our website or our mobile apps, and they all get sent to the same section, the same property for data collection. And again, here, where we have historically had the Universal Analytics property, which is typically prefixed by UA-123456, we now have data streams. So each property should correspond with a distinct user base. And then the digital properties that you have, whether it's a website or an app that's used by that user base, should all flow to the same place. And typically what that means is that we have data streams. Web data streams are prefixed by G. So you'll see G-123456. And then the app data streams are all distinguished by your Firebase app ID. So if you do have mobile apps that are part of your GA4 property, you'll need to install Firebase, and the Firebase app ID is how we would be able to distinguish data from one platform to the next. If you're curious how that looks, this is it. So we really do send data streams, all into this a single property and a single reporting interface. If you are connecting to BigQuery, for example, it would also be in a single BigQuery export. And so you can see we've got really this reporting tool to facilitate that cross platform reporting that is so coveted. And by way of example, if you haven't created your GA4 property yet, this may be a new screen for you. But once we've created the property, then we'll be asked to set up data streams. And again, this is how we say, this is how we tell Google Analytics, data from these platforms need to flow into this property. So by way of example, you might have your mainwebsite.com is kind of your web data stream, and then you might have additional data streams for an iOS mobile app and an Android mobile app. So in your web data stream, maybe you're using Google Tag Manager or on-page tracking code like the global site tag. And then in your mobile data streams, perhaps you're sending events from Firebase itself. And so this is typically how we think about sending events to this GA4 property to populate those reports. And so if you haven't already gotten started, then really what we're recommending you do after today is get started with parallel tracking. So because it is such a departure from the universal analytics property type, you yourself, as well as others in your organization, will need to get your feet wet with the new data model and become more comfortable with the reports that are available. And the best way to do this is to continue to use your universal analytics property that's already in place, and to continue to use your Firebase analytics if you're already using that in your Firebase project. But parallel to those, continue to get comfortable with the new reporting model. So if you're thinking about a kind of a high level plan of what that looks like, really it begins with creating a GA4 property. It's actually the default way when you create a new property in Google Analytics now. It defaults to GA4. So make sure that you create a GA4 property. Spend some time thinking about your event schema. This is a perfect time to renew your measurement strategy and to think about at a strategic level, what are the user actions that we need to track to report on whether we're advancing our strategy. If you think about fundamentally what analytics does, analytics is the layer that sits between our strategy and our execution. It's what tells us, did we do what we set out to do? And in order to do that, you need to have a measurement strategy about how you're going to answer that question. So develop that event schema. If you've already got one for Universal Analytics, this is a great time to go through and to identify which events do you need to stop, start, or continue to collect. And then you can map it to the new data model. When you map it to the new data model, you'll want to replicate any of the existing events that you're already collecting and configure whether that's in Google Tag Manager or in your Firebase and your mobile apps. Get that started so that you can start to collect this data. Go through a period of testing and then spread the wealth, spread the knowledge, share it with others on your team, get them comfortable. And then once you're comfortable, really at that point, we would make our GA4 property the new source of truth. Only at that point would we remove any legacy tracking and report solely on GA4. So we really do like to recommend this parallel tracking approach. Take your time with it. Make sure that everybody is comfortable, and with that, you'll get lots of questions answered about how users are interacting with your properties.
All right, so we have about 30 minutes left for some Q&A. Thank you so much, Sean, for walking through and getting us all grounded on what GA4 is and is not. It's always a great question, right? So we're going to start with some of the questions that were submitted through the Q&A feature, and then we also have a few topic starters from your earlier submissions. So the first one, I think, will be a very quick question. Does GA4 support referral exclusion lists?
Yeah, great question. The answer is the current state is not yet, at least not the way that we're used to it. There is a way to set up cross-domain measurement, and we are expecting greater support for referral exclusion lists. But right now, it is a bit of a challenge in the current state. That said, it shouldn't hold you back from getting started. everybody, kind of knows how important that feature is. So in fact, why don't I grab this link to the cross-domain measurement, and I'll share that in the chat. And then in the meantime, we can keep our eyes and ears out for the referral exclusion list.
Perfect. In addition to that, Sean, can you elaborate a little bit about if GA4 is ready for e-commerce projects?
Yeah, great question. So it is ready for e-commerce projects. In fact, there's in the Google Analytics documentation, there's a really great guide for how to configure your e-commerce. And there's also a set of reports. The last thing I'll comment here as well is probably about 10 days ago, just at the end of January, for those of you who have ever interacted with the Google Merchandise Store demo Google Analytics account for the Universal Analytics property, you'll be excited to find out that there's now a GA4 Google Merchandise Store demo account. So if you're curious to see how it's configured at all, or if you're curious to see what the reporting looks like, in fact, let me grab that link as well and share that in the chat. It's a really great starting point.
A wealth of knowledge. We have a question here on best practices for building out events and custom parameters. So we talked a little bit about the new data structure today, where we have the event name and then parameters associated with the name. Sean, if you were to give advice on how users should start to think about migrating their existing category, action, and label to the new data model, where might you start? I know you recently created a blog post on this, which I think would be a fantastic resource.
Yeah, so I've just shared in the chat a link to a blog post addressing this specific question. Kind of the TLDR version of this is really think about this from a couple of perspectives. The first is from the perspective of trying to standardize where we can. So Google Analytics will collect some events automatically, and we talked about some of those, like session start, first visit, if you're using mobile apps, first open, for example. And then Google also makes available some recommended events in terms of a naming convention. And so stick to those recommended naming conventions as much as possible. And then for your custom events, it's very early to try to say kind of what's a best practice. So instead, we've been thinking about things from a considerations, what to consider. And that's what we go over in the blog post that I've just shared in the chat. Kind of the best practice that seems to be emerging is, granular is good. So instead of, for example, setting a single event called videos every time a video gets started, or, every time there's progress in the video, or every time the video is completed, break those out into more granular events so that immediately it's apparent what the user action was that generated that event. So between that very short summary of the article and the article itself, I think you'll be off to a really great start with naming your events.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. A question about attribution. Does attribution, which in this case we'll define as the way that someone is arriving at your website, change with Google Analytics 4 from what we've typically seen in Universal Analytics? Great question.
So I like the way that you framed that in terms of how somebody is coming to our website. So in Universal Analytics, we're used to an attribution model of the last non-direct click model. And in all of our standard reports, anytime we see a goal completion assigned to a source, a medium, or a campaign, or any other campaign parameter, maybe a channel, we tend to think about it and we interpret it as that last non-direct click. In the GA4 interface, we actually have the ability to apply edits, especially through comparisons. to those standard reports. And currently we can choose between 4 different attribution types. We've got cross-channel last click, cross-channel last engagement, and then Google Ads preferred last click and Google Ads preferred last engagement. So we do get more flexibility. Previously, these alternate attribution types were only available in the multi-channel attribution reports. And so by bringing them into this comparisons feature, we can now look at it across all of those standard reports in GA4. The other piece, I'm not sure if we're going to get to this in another question, Abby, but the other piece I'll highlight is the way we think about source, medium, and campaign actually changes now that sessions are no longer part of the data model. Instead, we have a user source, medium, potentially campaign. So we have user level acquisition dimensions. We still have session level acquisition dimensions as well. And those are all based on that session start event. And then for conversion events, we also have event source, medium, etc. Dimensions. So with respect to attribution, part of that really does depend on how we're thinking about the campaign parameters and those acquisition dimensions that we're thinking about.
And this just flows very nicely into a concept about goal conversions being session-based and how that might be a little bit different in GA4. Sean, can you elaborate on how conversions in GA4 are set up based on that event and aren't necessarily going to be a one-to-one relationship with Universal Analytics today?
Yeah. So with everything being an event, even goals and conversions are based on events. And so let's maybe the easiest way is to go through an example. So let's imagine that we've got a form. Maybe it's a webinar registration form, and you go through the form, you register, and then you're redirected to a thank you for registering page. In Universal Analytics, you might have a destination goal. Firing anytime you reach thankyou.html, something like that. And so we're able to piggyback on that page view hit and say, for my goals, anytime there's a session where that contained a page view on /thankyou.html, let's count that as a goal completion. And then calculating conversion rate is really easy at that point, because you take the number of sessions with goal completions divided by the number of total sessions, and you've got your conversion rate. So with taking sessions out of the data model, that does change a little bit. The first thing is that we actually need a separate event for that interaction. So we don't want to turn every page view into a conversion. We only want to turn specific page views into a conversion. So in this instance, when somebody gets to that thank you page, they might generate an event called page view, but then they might also generate a second event called page view thanks, something like that. And then in the interface, there's a toggle where we can configure how that's considered, and we would toggle that and we would mark it as a conversion. And so what that allows us to do is it allows us to understand, for the most important events, how many conversions there are on a per user basis. One of the challenges right now with this new data model is if we are trying to replicate something like goal conversion rate as we're used to seeing it, I don't want to kind of overcommit or overpromise. It's actually challenging to find conversion rate as we've historically known it in the new GA4 interface. The same would be said about bounce rate, about site search metrics, etc. And so while we do expect some of these reports to be expanded on, we do see ourselves using intermediate solutions, things like BigQuery, to get to those same reports. But what I really want to get to, so notwithstanding the challenges of replicating the Universal Analytics, where I think this opens up a lot of new possibilities is for clients and websites and apps where that session-driven model doesn't naturally fit. So I'll give the example of a charity. If you're thinking about a charity, maybe they facilitate donations online, their conversion rate in August is always going to be significantly less than their conversion rate in December, based on seasonality. And so if you're monitoring conversion rate over time, it's probably not the most useful metric for them. Where they would actually get more value out of is thinking about, okay, for all of our monthly donors who signed up in August, how many of them were still donating monthly in September, in October, in November, in December, and so on. And so that's an analysis that was actually very challenging to get to in Universal Analytics, but becomes very easy to get to in GA4 with the new property type. So we need to think about things a little bit differently. If we are trying to use the new data model to get to some of those same reports, then in its current state, we need to be a little bit more deliberate about how we get to that. But it also opens up a new field of possibilities for a range of different types of businesses.
Perfect. Thank you, Sean. I think that answered several questions all in one, so I love it. Going down the list here, we have questions about setup, and we also have some questions about existing features. So one of the questions we have is about site search. Can you answer if site search will be impacted at all with GA4?
Yeah. So with site search, we get a couple of recommended events. We get search, we get view search results, for example, and so those still need to be configured. I don't believe, in fact, I can tell you we do not currently have standard reports for site search. However, what I'm going to do is share in the chat right now a blog post on Bounteous showing how you can recreate those reports using BigQuery. So again, this is another area where we are kind of expecting some enhancements. At least we're hoping for enhancements. But in the meantime, we can recreate things like site search metrics using BigQuery. And the blog that I've just shared includes some instructions on how to do so. It includes the SQL query that you'll need to do it as well.
Perfectly answered. We have a question about implementation. So if someone is setting up Google Analytics 4 and they are pushing an event to a Universal Analytics property in Google Tag Manager, what do they need to do to ensure that that event also gets sent to the GA4 property if they are parallel tracking?
Yeah, great question. So if you're using Google Tag Manager, when you create a new tag, you will notice that there is a new tag template. So previously we would have the ability to create a Universal Analytics tag, and that allows us to choose, the hit type. If we were choosing, for example, an event, then it would give us fields to enter the category, action, and label. What you'll see is that there's an additional tag template called a GA4 tag, and there are two additional templates. One is for the configuration, and then one is for the event. So the first thing that you need to do is load the config tag on all pages, and then for any specific event that you're firing, you would create an additional GA4 event tag. You'll probably end up piggybacking, if you're trying to do a one-to-one relationship, you'll probably end up piggybacking on the trigger that's already sending the UA event, as well as any variables that are being used to populate those fields. So the same way that you might have, for example, event label pointing to a variable of some kind, you might have an event parameter that now points to the same variable. And that's the extent of it. It can all be done in the same container that your website is already loading. So it's nice and easy that way.
And if you guys have additional questions about GA4 tag types, we do have a post on that as well, just getting started with some screenshots. Although, as we know, the Google Tag Manager interface is forever changing. So if the screenshots look a little different today than they did yesterday, that is not surprising for any of us. A question about UTM parameters. We talked a little bit about them earlier. We know that UTMs work in Google Analytics 4 and that we're sort of achieving the same results. But one of the attendees has recently seen that some UTM mediums are being classified as referrals. How might we go about troubleshooting UTMs in GA4?
That's a good question. So without knowing more details, probably my first approach would be to understand the users that are being affected by this. So if you're not already collecting client ID as a user property, I would probably make sure to grab that, and then I would probably try to understand whether whether we're talking about the UTM parameters being referral for just that session. So if we're talking about the session source medium campaign, or if we're talking about the user, because that will tell me if it's an issue with the session start or with the first visit events that are being affected. And then there is in the Analysis Hub, there's a user explorer technique. And so once I've found kind of a client ID that is having this issue, I would probably pull that into the Analysis Hub, use the user explorer report technique, and try to understand that a little bit more. If I'm still stuck, at that point we would probably look to BigQuery and look at the raw kind of event level data to see what's going on so that we can fix it.
Sean closed on my response. So typically this is going to be a troubleshooting of the actual UTM parameter in the URL. We would expect that GA4 would be able to track your UTMs, and BigQuery is a great place to identify and understand those individual user level insights that we have in GA4. And one of the benefits that I don't know if we mentioned today, but one of the benefits of GA4 is that the BigQuery integration is included for all users. So even if your property is a standard GA4 property, you can troubleshoot some of these events in BigQuery, which is awesome. Another question that we have that's near and dear to our hearts is a question about audiences. So Universal obviously has a nice feature to collect audiences and share those to Google Ads for remarketing. Is there something similar in GA4, and can we use those to build remarketing audiences?
Yes and yes. Short and sweet, yes and yes. So in the GA4 interface, in the top level navigation on the left-hand side, you'll see the ability to configure audiences. So you can create a new audience, which will feel like building a segment. And then if you've integrated your GA4 property with Google Ads, for example, you can bring those audiences. That's probably the only blog post that I don't have a URL ready for. But if you Google Bounteous GA4 Google Ads integration, you can find a wonderful walkthrough of how exactly to do that.
That one was done by Michael, so I'm sure he will be on it in a second. Another question that we have is just speaking about ads and those types of activities is integrations. So we know that there are going to be several integrations coming down the pipeline. One of those is Salesforce and other integrations that might not be available just yet. We have an attendee asking, why, if GA4 has an integration, for example, with Google Ads or Google BigQuery, why would I continue to use the Universal Analytics property, or why would I upgrade to GA360 if the free version already has a lot of the integrations that I need?
Yeah, so with respect to, sorry, I got confused about which part of that question I wanted to answer first.
That's okay. They're both good.
It's both, yeah, it is both good. So let's tackle the first piece about why would we still upgrade to GA360 if an integration like BigQuery is available in the GA4 property? So that for those who are unfamiliar, BigQuery is really a cloud data platform made available by Google, and GA360 customers on Universal Analytics have the ability to export their hit level data from Google Analytics to BigQuery, where they can run their own SQL queries on that data set and do pretty much any analysis that they want. So that's currently available in Universal Analytics, kind of GA360, but it's not available with the free Universal Analytics that non-GA360 customers are using. So the first question, or the second part of the first answer of that question of, if an integration like this is available in the free version of GA4, why would I upgrade to GA360? And to that, all I can say is that Google has announced that there will be a GA4 360. When GA4 came out of beta, they mentioned that in a blog post. In fact, let me get you the link to the GA blog in case you don't already have it. They haven't shared any additional details publicly, so we're not going to share anything publicly. We're taking Google's lead on that. That said, though, we do have a pretty good sense of some of the reasons why we might expect to see people still upgrade. Data collection limits, even though the details aren't public. I think it's pretty well known that there would be an increase in data collection limits, just the same way that there currently is between the free Universal Analytics and the GA360. So I think that was the second part of the question. And then the first part about the integrations, again, is, so currently the integrations that are available, Firebase, BigQuery, Google Ads, and Data Studio. And then future integrations, we'll leave it to Google to talk about those.
Perfect. I think this question kind of is in alignment with what we are talking about, which is, when is Universal Analytics likely to stop? That's a fantastic question that is the exact same answer as Sean had previously. We'll leave that to Google to, announce the plans for Universal Analytics. But as of today, we do expect that Universal Analytics will continue to collect and track your data as it has in the past, and that we just recommend that parallel tracking so that you can be prepared. Sean, any other follow-ups on that one?
No, perfect.
Perfect. All right. How many segments can we create in GA4?
I
think it's 200, but I can't remember the exact number. There's several segments that you can create.
Yeah, there's what I'll do is sometimes my memory just doesn't remember all of these facts. But what I can do is share a link to the collection and configuration limits. I believe that this is also linked to in the event naming considerations blog that I shared earlier. But I'll go ahead and share this, bookmark that one. You'll probably have lots of questions about it. I think segments are mentioned here, but I could be mistaken. For sure, though, with respect to audiences, there's a per property limit of 100 audiences per property. So the segments would be greater than that.
Perfect, thanks, Sean. What about channel groupings in GA4? Do we expect to have the ability to create them, or do we need them anymore?
I believe, I don't think Google has said anything publicly about this, but there are now default channel groupings available in the interface. And I think that this is an area that Google is trying to understand the use cases behind custom channel groupings, the ability to edit default channel groupings, etc. So oh, there's my Google Home again. So stay tuned from Google if as more about that specific feature becomes available.
Perfect. For everyone at the session, in the room, we do have a 5-minute warning here. So if you have any more questions, please add them to the Q&A, and I will be getting to them as many as we can. One of the questions that we have, Sean, is about cookie deletion and tracking with users. Is there a difference with GA4 and cookie policy than we see with Universal Analytics today?
There is a difference in how the identification happens. So let me first start by talking about what's the same, and especially from a web perspective. If somebody wants to dive into this more about the app, please jump in and we can elaborate more on that. But from a web perspective, everything is still a first-party cookie for Google Analytics, and that stores a client ID, which is kind of it will remember that browser and that device. And then in terms of if we are thinking about building remarketing audiences, anything like that, when we create the Google Analytics property, we have the ability to choose whether we want to, sorry, I should clarify, when we set up the data stream, we have the ability to choose exactly how we want that to work. So Google Signals is kind of the way that we would normally operate. And then we also, if we do have like an authenticated space where users are logging in, we can also add in our user ID. So that's the difference. If you have and Google Signals has been available in Universal Analytics properties as beta for some time. So if you've already participated in that beta, it's virtually the same. But otherwise, we are looking at Google Signals now with GA4. And what that means is that for people who have logged into Google somewhere, maybe in their Chrome browser or maybe somewhere else, they have full control over whether they participate in any personalization or not. And so the user really gets full control over that. If a user opts out of that, then that Signals data doesn't get it included in the cross-device reporting. But again, it's if you're already participating in Google Signals with the beta for the Universal Analytics property, it's identical to that.
Perfect, thanks, Sean. We have 2 more minutes. One question: how is GA4 answering the backstitching of sessions? Will we still have previous information from our Universal Analytics properties show up in our GA4 properties?
Sorry, I think my internet cut out a little bit. Can you repeat that, Abby?
Yep. How is GA4 answering to the backstitching of maybe non-logged in sessions? Will we still have historical information of our customers that might be represented in our Universal Analytics properties? Got it.
Thanks. Okay, so really good question. Essentially right now, the way that it works is, and we'll talk about this from a web perspective, but from an app perspective as well. When a property gets created, you'll get a new users metric, and that kind of counts, your first visit event or your first open event on app. And so there's a new first visit event for each client ID and for each user ID as well, which is one of the reasons why sometimes when you first create a property, the number of new users is higher than the number of active users. So it's a little bit confusing that way. But that said, it also does imply that kind of that backstitching of non-logged in events doesn't happen. So if you're looking to learn more about kind of how the user identification piece comes into play, Ken Williams actually has a really good series on how users get counted in GA4. So I would probably just do a search for Ken Williams GA4 user ID and read what he's dug into, because it's some really useful information there.
We are always looking forward to collaborating with the broader analytics community. We know there's tons coming up in GA4. So guys, I'm being cognizant of your time. We have hit the end of the hour, and I'm sure many of you have more questions. So we do have an upcoming Bounteous training, the one that Sean and I were talking about earlier that we developed a few months back. The next training is Wednesday, March 24th, and you can attend this training to have a few more of your questions answered, anything that you may sort of want to get in that we haven't talked about today. So like I mentioned earlier, everyone's going to get a recording of our session as well as a few resources from today. You'll receive a white paper that we wrote along with a discount code for that March GA4 training. So the slide I just had up, if you are interested in attending, be on the lookout for that email from our team so you can apply that discount code. Also continue to watch our blog. Sean and I are constantly adding new content along with the rest of our talented analytics and insight team here at Bounteous. And we will continue to share those insights with you. If we didn't answer your questions today, we'll hope to do so in our follow-up post as well. So thank you all for submitting so many questions and keeping this a lively conversation. And thank you, Sean, for answering all of our questions today. It was our pleasure to be here with each of you, and we hope that you really got a lot of value out of today's webinar. Looking forward to chatting with some of you at the next training. Thanks, everyone.